When it comes to product upgrades, Samsung's fallen into a bit of a trap of making small, incremental changes between each new generation. It's true of smartphones and true of the smartwatches. The Galaxy Watch 6 is very much like the Watch 5, but it did launch a classic model this year to add something a bit different to the range. But the question is that enough? I'm Cam Bunton from Pocket-lint, and in this review, I'll answer that question. Now, speaking broad strokes, it's tough to see much of a change in the Galaxy Watch 6 series from a design perspective. The aluminium casing looks practically identical to the casing on the Galaxy Watch 5 from last year, which is like the Watch 4 from the year before. That's to say, it's quite a basic, simple design featuring a completely flat screen and an aluminium frame that slopes down seamlessly into the strap lugs, and it features those two physical buttons. Changes aren't especially noticeable then, but that's not to say there aren't any. The bezels around the screen have been thinned, and the attachment release on the strap has changed to a single push button. So rather than have a fiddly catch, it's got a singular rectangular button that's easy to press, and that releases the strap. The only problem is, while it is much easier to remove, getting it back in position again can still be really fiddly, since you're still working with trying to fit a tiny pin into a little dimple inside the lugs. Now, there is a classic version though, and that adds a slightly different design to the mix. The shape of the casing isn't identical. It has a protruding part near the buttons to protect them from accidental presses, and of course, that raised bezel around the display. It's grooved along the perimeter, but more importantly has a rotating mechanism so that you can interact with the watch without having to touch the screen. It's also built from stainless steel rather than aluminium. The weird thing is that despite the more expensive materials, the design flourish and the rotating bezel, I don't actually get the feeling when I'm looking at or touching it that it's more premium. It's more like a fashion brand's take on a sporty watch than a premium watch. I think in this regard, Huawei watches are closer to the fit, finish and style of traditional watchmakers. There's more precision and attention to detail in the shaping and the fixtures. But as for overall durability, the Watch 6 is looking good here. There's sapphire crystal glass on the top, making it scratch and impact resistant. It's waterproof to depths of 50 meters, and it's dust resistant and military graded for shock and impact resistance too. In short, despite being light, it could more than cope with your daily scuffs and bangs and adventures in the rain, and so far it's lived up to those expectations. I've tested it in the rain during some hot sweaty workouts and even taken it scrambling across rocks at the base of an epic coastal cliffside. It's got banged up a bit at various points in my testing, including against the side of a kettlebell during workouts, and so far there's no sign of scratching or marking anywhere on the watch. That's to say, it's pretty much life-proof. The Watch 6 Classic has all those same ratings and protections, but with more moving parts. So there's that very slight gap between the bezel and the watch body, so that means you probably don't want this watch if you're always in really dusty and gritty environments. It also means that if you drop or bang the watch, it's more likely to hit that frame than the display. You'd be better off with the seamless model, or last year's Watch 5 Pro. Now, as for other specs, performance and features, the Watch 6 and the Watch 6 Classic are identical. The new larger displays were the first thing I noticed on the latest watches. By reducing what was quite a prominent bezel in the Galaxy Watch 5, Samsung made sure the screen is what grabs your attention on the Watch 6 and the Watch 6 Classic, particularly on the smaller 40 and 43mm models where the thicker bezel was more obstructive. The increasing display size doesn't just make the watch nicer looking though, it's about giving more space for detail and data, and giving you more space to swipe and tap with your finger. It not only makes it easier to read, but easier to interact with, so it's a very welcome upgrade, and one that you will notice if you've had an older model. It's sharp and clear, easy to read in pretty much any condition, including bright daylight. Plus, you get always-on functionality as usual, although that will reduce your battery life somewhat if you have it activated. As for software, this is the latest Samsung-powered version of Wear OS, and in this instance it's Wear OS 4 and running One UI 5 for watches on top. That means a combination of Samsung features like Samsung Wallet and Bixby, with all the services and features you'd expect from a Wear OS watch. So you'll get access to all the apps on the Play Store, including the recently announced WhatsApp for Android. Moving on to health and fitness, and Samsung has continued its improvements on this side. You get all the usual sensors for things like heart rate, blood oxygen, stress, movement, GPS, and electrical sensors for ECG. There's also the temperature sensor, which has been switched on this year, so it gives you additional intelligence, especially around monthly menstrual cycles. Using it, you can tell when your fertile window is, when you're ovulating, when your period is due, and monitors it all, displaying the data in an easy-to-read graphic. Heart rate data is personalized to you this year, allowing you to customize your heart rate profile. In use, the idea is that you perform intense exercise over a period of days, and then it learns what your peak heart rate is and then calculates your personal zones based on that data. The actual experience of tracking health and activities is solid too, so you can track all manner of activities with it. I tested it doing both low intensity and high intensity activities, and it's safe to say Samsung still does have a little bit of work to do in terms of speed and responsiveness and accuracy, at least with the heart rate sensor. I tested it alongside a couple of other watches while doing kettlebell sessions, and those often typically have reps where heart rate can jump quite high quite quickly. It seems to consistently be about 10 to 15 beats per minute below what my Apple Watch or the Huawei Watch was showing at those peaks. Or more accurately, it just seems to take a few seconds longer to register them. As an example, where my other watches would read somewhere between 155 and 170 straight away, the Samsung showed more likely 145 to 160. But it would eventually reach that peak just as I was recovering between sets. The good news, however, is that it's no longer a case of having to wait 5 to 10 minutes for the watch to register those higher readings. It's a lot more responsive than some of the older models are, and it was only slightly less responsive than other manufacturer watches, so meant that the average heart rate reading over the course of an activity was only just that bit lower. It was, at least, consistent with itself. Plus, the extra responsiveness means it's far more useful than any of the other Galaxy watches I've used. And so that for me makes it a worthwhile upgrade. Along with the more personalized efforts on the fitness side, there's an enhanced sleep coaching tool. It's part gimmick in that it assigns you an animal based on your sleeping style, but also actually useful. This sleep coaching and analysis doesn't just work from one night's sleep though. Initially you need to have worn the watch for 9 days, so that it's got enough work weekday data and enough weekend data to understand what your pattern is like during both of those times. It detected my sleep as healthy, consistent, with very little difference between weekend and weekday sleeping. Apparently, that means I'm a lion. The interesting bit comes after it's worked out what animal you are though. You can start a coaching plan with tips for maintaining and improving sleep consistency. Using it, you can glance through a checklist of good habits. For me, that means checking I woke up at 7:30 AM consistently, being active through the day, and not eating too late, or eating right before bed. Now, with internal components and overall product performance, the sense is that Samsung has tweaked things slightly and increased the power and speed to make it more fluid and responsive. Spec-wise, that means there's a new Exynos W930 inside, which is said to deliver almost 20% more than the chip inside the Watch 5. And RAM has been upgraded to 2GB as well, so that makes apps and activities smoother. It's joined by 16GB of storage for downloading apps and music. For the most part, when it comes to loading activities or apps on the watch, it did feel quick and smooth. There was the odd time where the interactions and the animation stuttered a little bit, but on the whole, it was quick. On the battery life front, Samsung suggests you could get up to about 40 hours if you leave the always-on display switched off, and with it on, you'll get about 30 hours. And in my testing, it wasn't too far off being accurate. On quieter days, without any intense fitness activity being tracked and with notifications kept to a minimum, I'd comfortably reach the end of a full day with around 30% left over. And that's with the always on display enabled. Because I wanted to test the sleep analysis feature, what usually happened is I'd dock it on the magnetic charging cable in the evening before bed, and then put the watch on at bedtime and wear it roughly until the same time the next day. I never really had the fear that it would run out though, even on my heavier usage days. And even when it does run out, it's relatively fast to refill again, so I wasn't ever left waiting that long when it was empty. In fact, half an hour docked on its charger can mean about half of the battery is refilled. After an hour, you've got more than enough to see you through the day. It takes about 90 minutes to do a completely full charge. Now, it is worth noting this was with the smaller models that have the lowest battery capacity. I suspect the larger models might take a little bit longer. So is the addition of the classic model worth the upgrade? Well, it could be if you don't particularly like the design of the regular model. What makes the bigger difference for me versus the older models is the improved heart rate responsiveness. Being able to do high intensity interval training and kettlebell workouts without worrying that my data is going to be completely off for the first 5 minutes is a real game changer. Otherwise, it's a strong Wear OS watch that will suit most Samsung users really well. But there are other better watches out there if you're more into fitness and sports. There's lots of Garmin watches and Huawei watches that are worth looking at. Still, a solid effort from Samsung. I've been Cam. Let me know what you think of these watches in the comments down below, or you can get me on Threads. I'm at Cam Bunton. If you did like this video, please do leave a thumbs up, subscribe and tap the notification bell, and I'll see you again in the next one. Bye for now.